how to do policing. And it leaves politics aside. So international engagement can work. And I would say that it depends. Overall, it works better on divisible issues that you can create mix sum, that you can have multiple winners, as Paula was saying. You know, you can go in. I recall at the very end of the war in Kosovo, in June of '99, AID and the World Bank both had these community development projects in which they brought these guys in, and they were going around the villages and creating these community councils and helping them to establish what are the priorities, what do you want us to do, what kinds of things do you need. We had them like buy windows for the gyms and things, and gymnasiums, so that it could. That was a bit of a fun project, but at any rate, you did get them to do those sorts of things. We even make decentralization much more indivisible by thinking about it as a way of solving the national question, which is what we've done in Kosovo. The idea is we'll create these little Serb communities so that they'll be loyal to Kosovo. And anyone who has ever talked to Serbs knows that there's no way that those Serbs are going to be loyal to Kosovo. Every Serb I've dealt with in Kosovo over a number of years that I've talked to, they're loyal to one or other party up in Belgrade, whether it's Milosevic, whether it's the church, whether it's Koštunica, that they're all kind of loyal to these different parties. And so politically, and even locally, where you can have some positive relationships after the initial, after '99, it was very tough for about a year. But politically, they know who butters their bread. They know who pays their salaries, and their salaries are paid if you're a Serb teacher, a Serb doctor, a Serb official, especially the northern municipalities, or even in places in the center of Kosovo, like Orahovac or Štrpce. You're paid from Belgrade, and so you're not going to be loyal to Pristina when your pay comes from Belgrade. And so those are the kinds of issues, and trying to create some decentralization to solve that issue is not going to work, just as it wouldn't work in Bosnia, where you're trying to create these Croat little municipalities in the late 90s when these guys were being financed and funded by HDZ and through emigre funds and all this. That just wasn't going to work. So that's the issue with Kosovo Serbs. In general, issues become more indivisible in protectorates, Bosnia, Kosovo, than it does in sovereign states, Croatia and Macedonia. It's easier to sort it through. And as far as Kosovo Serbs are concerned, I mean, it's really a quite difficult set of problems. And similarly, we often talk about, we used to always say in Kosovo, well, we're just doing technical. We're not doing politics. We just want to help, do technical assistance, or we just want to, do administration. But the locals see it all as politics. To them, they're still in these places, especially to a much lesser extent in Croatia than in the other three, and to a lesser extent in Macedonia than the other two. But everywhere they see all kinds of conspiracies and politics and all of this, and you cannot give a technical assistance program withoout them wondering who's winning, who's losing, from a political culture that continues to ask the Leninist question of who will kill whom. Kto kogo, or Kolče koga, as they say in Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian. So that technical capacity building, one has to, when you're designing it, we need to consider these political issues. And then when it comes to questions of institution building, is that, as Paula was saying, is that you have to look at the impact of the community. This can't be done in a week. I would argue it can't even be done in a year or two. I mean, institutions are long-term, are complex things with their own cultures. Think about changing, say, the institution of the State Department, where we were this morning talking. I mean, it's a really difficult thing to change patterns of behavior and activities and communications and value structures of multiple people and things. And so that the idea of building institutions that are sustainable in any kind of short period is not possible. And so this takes us to, which means that the international community can't leave. I mean, and not only that, the Americans can't leave. We just love to leave because who cares about the Balkans? There's no oil, no great strategic interest there. But in fact, there is, because there's a great gain there. I mean, they talk about the Great Game in Afghanistan. Well, there's a smaller version of the Great Game there. I mean, the Russians are back. They're playing in a major way. They've just bought up the Serbian gas industry. They're continuing to be very aggressive. The Europeans are demonstrating, I think the Europeans, we'll get to in the next slide, the Europeans are not demonstrating the kind of cohesiveness or the authoritativeness to kind of take over. Just as they weren't in 1989, they're a bit more than now, but not terribly, so that there continues to be a need for Americans. I taught USAID closed up shop in Zagreb over the last year in Croatia. And I was talking with these decentralization people there from this association of cities and counties and stuff. And I was asking them how they felt about that. And they said, we like the Americans. They said the Americans were a different voice. Even if they didn't have money to give us for projects, it would be great to be able to talk to them. And by the way, even in Croatia, even though there was we had a relatively small project, it was USAID was responsible for Croatians adopting a law having the direct election of mayors, which would in some ways allow for a certain kind of depoliticization. No idea how it would work because it's quite recent, but it was the USAID project over 2 or 3 years that kind of built up a policy process, cultivated the right kind of people, pushed gently, and pulled in certain ways, and they got this law through. And nobody I talked to knew if it was going to work. Not everybody thought it was a great law, but without a doubt, it was the fruit of USAID quietly working on this project. And everyone seemed to say it was a pretty good way of going, especially when there wasn't this huge UN or EU mission kind of blundering along the way they are in other places. And so there's very much an American interest there, I would argue. And then when we talk about ownership, again, everything we've been talking about, both of us, is that the design. I mean, there are some things, war crimes issues, ethnic conflict kinds of issues, that the international community, International Court of Justice, or however you want to do it, war crimes courts, The Hague is too expensive, but there are different ways of doing it, that the internationals are going to have to play a major role in, because you can't expect you can't expect a Croatian judge, a Serb judge, or whatever, to kind of be objective in that, or not to be subjected to pressures from ethnic radicals. So that there's some things that we're going to have to play, and that we're going to have to, in other words, part of a toolkit will have to be a heavy international hand. But part of the toolkit will have to be, we're going to concede, we're going to give it up. You're gonna, it's as T.E. Lawrence said, better to let the Arab do it imperfectly than for us to do it perfectly, because they will own they will control it. So that the minute you begin to give up the design, the minute you begin to allow them to begin defining goals and all of that, then what comes out at the end of the sausage making process is going to be not quite what you had in mind, but it'll likely to work a little better. And so, and it's